Gardening books I grew up with told me to prune in late fall, cut everything back clean, shape it all up before the frost came in, and make the garden look like it meant something. I followed those rules for years, and my garden looked like I'd been trying very hard and getting very little for it. Then I started watching what the older women on my street actually did, the ones with gardens that looked effortless, that bloomed from April through October, that never seemed to be falling apart or going scraggly in August the way mine was. They were not following the books. They were following something else entirely. And once I understood what that was, I stopped following the rules too. I want to be clear. I am not telling you to do whatever you want with a pair of pruners and call it a philosophy. What I am telling you is that the women who gardened in the 1950s, who grew up learning from their mothers and their neighbors and their own hard observation, had worked out a set of habits that the modern gardening industry has quietly replaced with calendar advice and product recommendations. And some of what they knew is not taught anymore. What I am about to share comes from those women, the things they did that nobody writes down, that get lost when a generation stops passing it on. One of the most surprising is coming up, the one about how they handled overgrown shrubs that looked like they were done for. Modern gardeners look at those shrubs and start pricing replacements. The old women reached for their loppers and fixed it in 10 minutes. Stay with me. The first thing those women understood, and understood deeply, is that you prune spring-blooming shrubs after they bloom, not before and not in the fall. Lilacs, forsythia, wagula, mock orange, every one of them sets next year's flower buds on the new wood they grow after they bloom this year. You prune them in October, you're cutting off next spring's flowers without even knowing it. I learned this one the hard way. 3 years of beautiful forsythia leaves and not a single yellow bloom. And then finally, a neighbor set me straight. Prune it the week the flowers drop. Let it spend the rest of summer growing the buds you will see next April. The calendar is not your guide here. The plant is. The second thing they knew, and this one still surprises people when I tell them, is that you pinch chrysanthemums. Not once, 3 times. Starting around Memorial Day and going through the beginning of July, every time a stem on your mum reaches about 6 inches, you pinch the top set of leaves right off between your thumb and your finger. No scissors necessary. What that does is force the plant to branch instead of grow tall, and every branch becomes a stem with a flower bud on it. One plant, 3 pinches, becomes a plant with dozens of flowering stems instead of 8 or 10. The farm wives did this while they were walking through the garden in the morning. 2 minutes of pinching, and they had flowers wall to wall come September. Stop pinching by the 4th of July, and that is all there is to it. Garden centers won't always tell you this, because they would rather sell you a second plant. Out of the tricks I have shared so far, which one are you realizing you have been doing wrong all along or skipping entirely? Drop it in the comments. Gardeners in different zones read those, and your real experience helps someone figure out what works where they live. Now, the renovation cut. This is what I promised you, the one the modern garden world treats like a last resort. The old women treated it like a first response. You have an overgrown shrub. Maybe a forsythia gone leggy and tangled, maybe an old spirea that blooms only at the top with bare sticks at the base, maybe a butterfly bush that has just gotten too much for itself. The books tell you to tip prune it, shape it gradually over 3 years. The old women cut it back, hard, down to about 6 to 8 inches from the ground before it leafs out in spring, and the shrub, which had been spending all its energy on a tangle of old exhausted wood, Suddenly has all of that root power going into fresh new growth. By the end of summer, it is a new plant, fuller than it was, younger than it was. I watched my neighbor do this to a forsythia that had not bloomed properly in a decade. By August, it was covered in new green branches. The following April, a wall of yellow. Trust me on this one. This is exactly the kind of decision I had in mind when I built the Lazy Garden Blueprint, because knowing how to prune only helps if you know which plants you have and what they need and when. So many gardeners are doing the right thing to the wrong plant in the wrong season, and they cannot figure out why nothing improves. The blueprint walks through the layering system I use. Each plant has a job. Each season has its tasks, and none of them pile on top of each other. It is linked on screen, but I have not told you about deadheading yet. And that is where most people are losing half their bloom season without ever realizing it. Deadheading is something the old women did entirely by feel. Salvias, petunias, coneflowers, dahlias, deadhead these and they bloom again. They're trying to make seed, and when you remove the flower before it can finish, they try again. Cut the spent head back to the first healthy leaf or the first side shoot, and within a week you have new buds forming. But here's what they also knew. You do not deadhead everything. Black-eyed Susans. Leave the seed heads up for the goldfinches all winter. Ornamental grasses. Leave them standing because those hollow stems shelter the insects that keep your garden balanced come spring. This is the kind of thing your grandmother knew and nobody teaches anymore. You do not clean up the whole garden. You clean up the plants that bloom again when you ask them to, and you leave the ones that are feeding something. The next habit is one the old women were quiet about, because it looks alarming if you do not understand why it works. Tall garden phlox, coneflower, rudbeckia, Joe Pye weed. Around the very end of May, when they're about knee-high, she would take them back by about half. The result is a plant that blooms later than the stem she left alone, on shorter and sturdier growth that does not need staking, with more flower heads than would have formed on the original. I wasted 3 summers figuring this out so you do not have to. Take half the stems back and leave the other half untouched, and you get 2 distinct waves of bloom from the same plant in the same summer. And finally, this is the one that goes against everything the neighbors expect when they see you out in October. The old women left their gardens standing through winter. They did not cut the perennials to the ground in the fall. The seed heads stayed for the birds. The hollow stems stayed for the beneficial insects overwintering inside them. The standing debris insulated the crown from freeze and thaw cycles that heave roots right out of the ground. They cleaned up in early spring before the new growth pushed through. Modern gardeners spend October cutting everything back clean and wonder why their perennial beds are thin and weedy come July. Leave it standing. Let winter do what it does. Come back in March with your shears when you can see what survived. The women who built these habits were not following a book. They were watching. They were learning one season at a time, passing it on. Now you know. Knowing these tricks is one thing. Setting up a garden where all of them work together, where you're not scrambling to remember what gets cut when, that is what I built in the Lazy Garden Blueprint. I built it because I kept watching good gardeners make the same mistakes I made in my first 10 years. It is a 30-day system built around the lazy layer method, combinations that come back, spread naturally, and take work off your plate instead of adding to it. It cost something, 'cause putting it together took real time. The link is on screen. If you want the garden without the fussing, that is where it is. Now put the calendar down and go watch your garden instead. See you in the next one.